Meet Kiyoshi Adachi. Because he remained a virgin until he turned 30, he gained the ability to use magic. That said, his power was painfully drab. At a grocery store, while handing over his items, the cashier was irritated the second her finger touched his. And that brings us to Adachi's powers, being able to hear the thoughts of people he was touching. Yeah, that's pretty much it, nothing else. It wasn't a very useful power, and was dreadful to deal with while commuting on the train. He could hear every single person's thoughts who bumped into him. He had thought about touching girls he was interested in to see how they felt. But if he were someone who could touch people, he wouldn't be a virgin in the first place. Waiting for the elevator at the office, Kurosawa greeted him and asked why he sighed heavily. Adachi hated how crowded the elevator was every morning. Sparkling with charisma, Kurosawa suggested they take the stairs to the 17th floor together. His charm was so blinding, Adachi would shield his face. Kurosawa was handsome, good at his job, friendly to plebs like Adachi, and nice to everyone. All the ladies gushed over him. Adachi thought he was so devastatingly popular. Unlike himself, he figured Kurosawa must have lost his virginity in his teens. Eager to know what he was thinking about, Adachi would softly place his hands on Kurosawa's back. Kurosawa was feeling lucky about running into someone this morning. He tried his best not to stare, so he wouldn't seem creepy, but just looking at that bedhead, he thought the person was so cute. Adachi was shocked to see that he was in love with someone at work. Initially, he assumed Kurosawa had a girlfriend. Inside the elevator, he looked at the ladies, trying to figure out which one of them had a bedhead. Someone would bump into them, causing Kurosawa to lean over him. Staring down at Adachi, Kurosawa was losing his mind, thinking he was so cute. He loved him so much. Being so up close, he thought he'd die. Adachi, however, couldn't believe what he just heard. Now in the office, he still refused to believe this was happening. At this point, he felt his magic powers and everything he had heard were all hallucinations. It didn't even make sense that he got magic powers, and that Kurosawa liked him. Looking at him converse with their president, Adachi thought he was too perfect. Even their crabby president was fawning over Kurosawa. The director would then call him over, telling him to have the documents for the Alberio company ready by the end of the day. Adachi mentioned that he said previously he wanted them next week, but the director didn't give him much of a choice. Back at his seat, he wondered what Kurosawa could possibly like about someone as lame as him. Later at night, Adachi was still working. Kurosawa would bring some coffee for him, thinking that he should ask others for help once in a while. He decided to help Adachi, though he wished he would ask his help more often. As Adachi handed him a document, their fingers would touch. At that moment, he could hear Kurosawa thinking about the mole on the nape of his neck, and how much he wanted to lick it. Flustered, Adachi rushed off to the bathroom. There, he saw that there was actually a mole on his neck, and he came to the realization that none of this was a hallucination. Closing from work, Adachi thought no one would come to his rescue if Kurosawa decided to force himself on him. Kurosawa then mentioned it was quite cold. Just then, Adachi sneezed, and before he knew it, he had a scarf wrapped around his neck. Kurosawa was glad he brought it today. Noticing his bloodshot eyes, he didn't like how the director dumped so much work on Adachi, and seeing how nice he was, Adachi felt bad for thinking Kurosawa would actually try to take advantage of him. He thanked him for being here to help him today, but then, Kurosawa joked about having Adachi thank him with his body. Was it actually a joke? Either way, Adachi had a cold sweat running down his spine. With the last train gone, he was stumped, seeing that he'd have to pay for a taxi. Kurosawa would invite him into his place, since it was a short taxi ride away. Adachi worried. What if Kurosawa had ulterior motives? Was this really the best choice? The only way he'd know was to touch Kurosawa, but as he tried to, he fell to the ground. As Kurosawa lent him a hand, he saw his chance. In the end, Kurosawa just hoped Adachi hadn't been hurt. He was such a nice guy. So, Adachi agreed to stay over at his place for the night. Kurosawa then began having so many fantasies, and Adachi had no idea what he had gotten into. Kurosawa's apartment was dripping with popular guy vibes. Adachi couldn't relax, but then he found a comic he was familiar with. Kurosawa was a bit embarrassed about it. However, Adachi was a fan. The trial arcs were their favorite. It was surprising to see they had similar tastes. Kurosawa mentioned the bath was ready while handing over a pair of pajamas to Adachi. He had always fantasized about how cute Adachi would look in them, and now he'd get to see for himself. Man, he's so down bad. Adachi wanted anything but to wear those pajamas. Even in the bath, he couldn't shake off the chills he got. Afterwards, Kurosawa offered him some beer. Scared he'd get drunk, Adachi opted for a glass of water instead. Lost in thought, he wondered if this would have been easier if either of them were women. Because he had no romantic experience in the 30 years of his life, Adachi still didn't know what to do, even though he knew what Kurosawa was thinking. By the time Kurosawa was out of the shower, Adachi had fallen asleep. More like he was just pretending because he didn't know how to face him. Fear would grip him as Kurosawa slowly approached. All he could do was close his eyes tightly. Kurosawa stared down at him for a while, before grabbing his phone from the table. And as he left, Adachi found himself wondering why he didn't make a move. You'd think he wanted Kurosawa to actually try something. Adachi's head was a mess with so much going on. For a virgin like him, this was too much to handle. Meanwhile, Kurosawa couldn't stop thinking about how Adachi looked in that moment. Neither of them would be able to sleep that night. The next morning, the sweet smell of Kurosawa making breakfast would wake up Adachi. The meal tasted so good. Adachi was shocked that he made a proper meal first thing in the morning. Unlike Kurosawa, he couldn't cook at all. Kurosawa then asked if he'd like to come over and eat every morning. With how good the food was, Adachi actually considered it for a second. Kurosawa's omelet was restaurant quality, and he'd admire as Adachi ate the food happily. Over at the office, Adachi made up his mind to keep his distance for a while. Kurosawa's love was too much for him and his zero romantic experience. The director would scold Adachi for slacking off, as if it wasn't his fault for making him work overtime. Hearing that Kurosawa helped Adachi with the documents from yesterday, the director called him over. The director would apologize to Kurosawa for having him help Adachi, but Kurosawa would actually praise Adachi, saying he did most of the work. There was a tasty Korean barbecue place nearby. The director then gave them a coupon so they could go together. For Kurosawa, it was as if the director was playing Cupid. On the other hand, Adachi saw him as a pest. At the restaurant, Adachi regretted the fact he couldn't decline the invitation. On the bright side, the food was delicious. Seeing how Adachi stuffed his face with food made Kurosawa laugh. He said he looked cool, but he actually wanted to call him cute. In the end, they both had fun. However, when it was time to pay, the cashier told them the coupon had expired, and Adachi was too broke, so Kurosawa would pay with his card. Rather than splitting the bill, he asked Adachi to treat him with their next paycheck. Without a doubt, he liked Adachi, but he never tried to make a move. If he continued helping with his job and was kind to him, then Adachi thought things were fine this way. Besides, Kurosawa was a good friend and fun to be around. As he grabbed the candy from Kurosawa's hand, he could hear him think, "Now I have an excuse to go out and eat with Adachi again. I'm really lucky. I love him so much. I'm so happy. I don't want to go home tonight. I don't want him to leave." Hearing all this, Adachi pulled back, looking frightened. He then apologized to Kurosawa, feeling guilty about the train of thought he just had. It wasn't like he could reciprocate Kurosawa's feelings. They'd stopped by a convenience store, where Adachi insisted on paying him. He was grateful for all Kurosawa had done, but he didn't want to keep imposing on him. He quickly handed him the money and ran away. After getting some distance, Adachi wondered what he should have done back there. He had never seen Kurosawa make such a hurt face before. From you not liking the video and subscribing to my channel, because here on my Shoujo Weekly too, I'm covering all the gay stuff I want on the main channel. You like boy love? I got more in store. My next piece will probably be a manhwa, but once you watched all that, and maybe you're looking for regular shoujo content, check out my completed series playlist on the main channel. So come on, hit that subscribe. I'll post more gay guys. Adachi decided to seek advice from an old college classmate, Masato Suge, a now romantic novelist. Sitting across from him, Adachi nervously confessed everything, his mysterious ability to read minds, and the fact that his male coworker, Kurosawa, was in love with him. Suge listened with a skeptical look. In his mind, this all sounded like the ramblings of a 30-year-old virgin losing his grip on reality. Still, Adachi insisted he was serious. Suge was the only person he could confide in, and as a romance writer, he figured Suge would have plenty of experience. Putting the supernatural aside, Suge questioned why Adachi couldn't just play dumb and let Kurosawa keep crushing on him. He even suggested taking advantage of Kurosawa's kindness. After all, plenty of people did that in relationships. Adachi had thought about it, but the idea made him feel guilty. Kurosawa's feelings were sincere. He couldn't bring himself to exploit them. That earnestness only made Suge sigh. According to him, that was exactly why Adachi was unpopular. Too sincere, too awkward, too dense. Still, Adachi genuinely didn't know what he was supposed to do. Maybe that very cluelessness was what Kurosawa liked about him. In the end, Suge told him to focus less on Kurosawa's feelings and more on his own. And if things became too troublesome, he could always find a way to make Kurosawa dislike him. Grateful for the advice, Adachi offered Suge some taiyaki as thanks. But when their fingers brushed, Adachi's ability activated, and he heard Suge's true thoughts. The romance novelist was a virgin too. Walking home, Adachi wondered what the point of that visit had been. Even so, Suge's words lingered in his mind. How did he really feel about Kurosawa? He reflected over how Kurosawa was kind, handsome, and genuinely fun to be around. Even as another man, Adachi couldn't deny that. There wasn't a single thing about Kurosawa that made him want to pull away. At work the next day, Adachi's thoughts wandered. If they dated, it might actually be nice. Kurosawa had even made him breakfast that morning after he stayed over. For a brief second, Adachi imagined Kurosawa leaning in for a kiss, only to violently shove the image out of his mind. There was no way he could handle that. When their eyes met across the office, Kurosawa smiled as usual. Adachi quickly looked away. After running off the other night, he couldn't understand how Kurosawa could still smile so naturally. Despite being the busiest person in the department, Kurosawa remained effortlessly kind. Somehow, that made Adachi feel small. Then, trouble struck. A client at Kurosawa's table was clearly upset. The tea had been taken away. Kurosawa was apologizing, and the entire office atmosphere turned tense. The star of the sales department was rarely flustered, but today, he seemed stuck. The client abruptly threatened to call off the deal. Without thinking, Adachi stepped in to serve coffee. As he leaned in close, he brushed against the client, activating his mind-reading ability. Apologizing politely, Adachi offered to bring back their usual service. Moments later, the once grumpy client was happily eating shortcake and chatting with Kurosawa again. The problem? The man had a serious sweet tooth. He'd been irritated because no sugar had been served. The shortcake he usually received had been missing. The director praised Adachi for noticing. Kurosawa then went close to his ear and thanked him sincerely, apologizing for worrying everyone. Soon enough, the office returned to normal. That night, the team went out to celebrate. They toasted to Adachi, the unexpected hero of the day. Kurosawa thanked him again, admitting it had been a long time since he blinked like that. For the first time, Adachi felt grateful for his strange ability. As drinks flowed, someone suggested a round of the King's Game. Fate seemed to enjoy mischief. When the numbers were drawn, Kurosawa and Adachi were ordered to kiss. The room erupted with cheers. Oh no, the BL, it's happening. Adachi froze. This would be his first kiss, and with Kurosawa, no less. Kurosawa looked calm on the surface, but Adachi could feel the tension beneath. The others urged them on, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Pulling Adachi close, Kurosawa said it was just a game. They should get it over with. But noticing how terrified Adachi looked, he gently pressed a kiss to his forehead instead. The girls groaned in disappointment. Kurosawa reminded everyone that even in a game, no one could force someone else to kiss. As he walked away, Adachi remembered hearing Kurosawa whisper, "Sorry." Later, Adachi found him alone by the balcony and handed him a bottle of water. Kurosawa grumbled that the game had gone too far, and when their elbows brushed, Adachi heard the truth in Kurosawa's heart. He had truly wanted that kiss. Yet, he believed Adachi wasn't into men, and he felt guilty for falling in love with him. Adachi swallowed hard and admitted something surprising, even to himself. I didn't mind. He'd been startled, sure. He'd never kissed anyone before. He wasn't popular, had no romantic experience, and the idea terrified him. The moment those words left his mouth, there was no taking them back. Kurosawa's water bottle slipped from his hand. His eyes widened in shock as he asked if Adachi understood what that meant. Ever since his conversation with Suge, Adachi had been reflecting on his feelings. The urge to help Kurosawa, the fact that he didn't recoil from his affection, the discomfort he felt at the thought of Kurosawa being sad. They were all real. He had always wondered why he'd been given the power to read minds. But after repeatedly touching Kurosawa's heart, he realized something for the first time. He wanted to know him better. Kurosawa leaned in, pressing Adachi gently against the railing. He was about to confess something more, but their coworkers suddenly appeared, ruining the moment. Kurosawa ended up on the floor, and the group teased them before heading off to settle the bill. On the way out, Kurosawa grabbed Adachi's arm and asked him to stay the night again. This time, he didn't want to let Adachi leave. Adachi panicked and shouted that he was going home. The next day at work, everything felt strangely normal. Kurosawa acted as if nothing unusual had happened. Meanwhile, Adachi was dying to know what he was thinking. When Kurosawa leaned over to request some files, his chest brushed against Adachi. In his mind, Kurosawa was relieved that Adachi didn't dislike him, but he also worried he had rushed things. So, he decided to act normal at the office. Adachi had no idea how to respond. All he could think was that Kurosawa was far too good for someone like him. But Kurosawa had always made up his mind, placing his hand gently over Adachi's, thinking that because he knew Adachi didn't have romantic experience, he resolved that slowly, steadily, he would make Adachi fall for him. Adachi thought he was a terrifyingly persistent stud. Adachi's company decided to host a karaoke night, and from the moment he arrived, he wished he had. The women in the office were already crowding around Kurosawa, clearly determined to win his attention. As if that weren't uncomfortable enough, Yuta noticed Adachi sitting alone and came over to join him. Something Adachi did not appreciate. Yuta plopped down beside him, but instead of flirting, he admitted he was feeling sick from drinking too much. Adachi, who couldn't handle alcohol well either, pulled out some stomach medicine he always carried and offered it to him. The small act of kindness did not go unnoticed. From across the room, Kurosawa's expression darkened. Moments later, he approached and smoothly informed Yuta that some ladies at another table were asking for him. Yuta immediately ran off, leaving Kurosawa to take his seat next to Adachi. Adachi couldn't tell whether Kurosawa was genuinely considerate or subtly possessive. The only way to know for sure would be to touch him and read his thoughts. But how was he supposed to do that without looking suspicious? When Kurosawa leaned in close, Adachi instinctively backed away instead. The manager asked Kurosawa to sing, but he declined. Adachi found that surprising. For someone who excelled at everything, refusing the mic felt strange. Was he tone deaf? The thought almost made Adachi laugh. When Yuta finished the song, Adachi complimented him. That was all it took. Kurosawa stood up, took the mic, and began to sing. The room fell silent. His voice was flawless, rich, smooth, and powerful enough to move everyone to tears. It was unfair. Even his singing was perfect. Adachi felt an irrational flicker of annoyance at just how good he was. Afterward, Kurosawa returned to sit beside him as they shared some pizza. Soon, the women came over again, asking to sit next to Kurosawa. As Adachi stood up to make space, one of the women's feet brushed his. She looked at him coldly, thoughts wondering why someone like him was the one sitting beside Kurosawa. Embarrassed and overwhelmed, Adachi excused himself to get a drink. Maybe she wasn't wrong. Why would someone as handsome and accomplished as Kurosawa sit next to him? In the hallway, he bumped into Nozomi, their secretary. She was taking drink orders and kindly asked for his. Adachi chose oolong tea. He'd always thought Nozomi was nice. If only someone like her would ever look at him that way. But that kind of convenient romance didn't exist in his life. Not long after, he stumbled upon Nozomi being harassed by two men. Spotting Adachi, she rushed to his side for help. The men were intimidating, and Adachi was terrified, but he forced himself to step up and tell them to stop. One of the men grabbed him by the tie, snarling that it was none of his business. Adachi nearly froze in fear. Then, Kurosawa appeared. Calm but imposing, he twisted the man's wrist, hard enough to make his point. Noticing they were employees of Narasaki Corporation, Kurosawa warned them firmly. The men retreated immediately. Nozomi gestured a thank you. Adachi briefly thought she was thanking him, but reality set in quickly. Kurosawa looked cool no matter what he did. His effortless composure was almost irritating. Kurosawa admitted he'd come because he was worried about Adachi. Noticing a red mark on his neck, he carefully placed a bandage there. As he did, his thoughts betrayed him. He worried he'd been too pushy lately and feared Adachi would pull away. When it came to Adachi, he always lost his composure. He was even jealous of Yuta and Nozomi, despite knowing they had no romantic interest in Adachi. He scolded himself for being so narrow-minded. For the first time, Adachi realized Kurosawa wasn't perfect and untouchable. He got jealous, he worried, he felt insecure, and somehow that vulnerability made him cute? He's falling, guys. Adachi thanked him sincerely. Even without touching him, he could see how happy Kurosawa was. They decided to quietly slip out and get ice cream together. The next day, Adachi, Kurosawa, and Yuta went to a sauna. When Kurosawa removed his shirt, he revealed a toned, athletic body. Yuta assumed he played sports, but Kurosawa modestly said, at the age of 30, he went to the gym to stay healthy. In truth, he worked out so Adachi wouldn't see him out of shape. Inside the sauna, Kurosawa was hyper-aware of how close Adachi sat beside him, vulnerable and unaware. Though he had only ever dated women, his feelings for Adachi were undeniable. He wondered what he'd think if he saw him fully. The heat became too much for Adachi, who stood abruptly to leave. His towel slipped slightly, revealing part of his lower body. Kurosawa's thoughts spiraled. Adachi's soft, pale skin looked almost like Shiratama. He couldn't stop himself from wanting to touch it. Adachi quickly adjusted his towel and fled, later deciding he should probably start working out. On their way home, Kurosawa couldn't stop looking at him. He snapped a picture, refusing to delete it, despite Adachi's protests. If they were dating, he reasoned taking pictures wouldn't be strange. But since they were coworkers, maybe it was. Kurosawa admitted to himself that he was becoming greedy. At first, he only wanted to be near Adachi. Now, he wanted more. Spending time together was wonderful, but painful too, knowing Adachi might only see him as a friend. Kurosawa had always benefited from his handsome appearance, but in the working world, that same face earned him resentment. People dismissed him as a playboy. They assumed he relied on charm alone, when in reality, he worked relentlessly. During a meeting with President Matsura Yukiko, Kurosawa handled the conversation smoothly, earning her favor. Adachi, uncomfortable with drinking, struggled. Kurosawa stepped in and drank in his place. When Yukiko tried to make a move on Kurosawa, he felt sick and excused himself. Outside the restroom, he overheard coworkers criticizing him for upsetting the president. Suddenly, he couldn't breathe. Later that night, Adachi found him sitting alone on a park bench. Kurosawa felt useless for failing the deal, but Adachi disagreed. He praised Kurosawa for researching clients thoroughly, learning every detail about products, and even drinking in his place earlier. Adachi had always thought Kurosawa was flawless. Seeing him vulnerable felt new. His words made Kurosawa's heart race. When Adachi noticed his flushed expression and asked what was wrong, Kurosawa brushed it off as alcohol, but in truth, he was completely captivated. Months later, Kurosawa realized he'd begun watching Adachi constantly. Falling in love like this at his age felt unexpected. Life was truly unpredictable. One day, after Adachi finished helping a child, Kurosawa approached him and complimented his attentiveness. He loved that about him. Adachi, however, saw himself as gloomy and awkward. He often felt like helping others would only bother them, but spending time with Kurosawa had given him confidence. Those words alone were enough to reignite Kurosawa's hope. Adachi made him feel uneasy and incredibly happy over the smallest things. Taking advantage of the moment, Kurosawa playfully insisted they take a picture together, another excuse to keep Adachi just a little closer. One morning, Suge woke up to find his cat, Udon, comfortably resting on his chest. After feeding him, he sat down to work, trying to finish chapter 7 of his manuscript. Just as he began focusing, the doorbell rang. A delivery man had arrived with a package, though Suge already dreaded dealing with this particular guy again. The man had recently started working as the area's delivery driver, and Suge had taken an immediate dislike to him. In Suge's mind, the guy looked like a party-loving type with an unpleasant look in his eyes. Looking over the packages, Suge noticed that one was from his parents, and the other from his publisher. As he picked them up, he suddenly remembered that yesterday had been his birthday. While receiving the boxes, his hands accidentally brushed against the delivery man's. Instantly, Suge heard the man's thoughts. Just like Adachi, he had gained the ability to read minds after turning 30. The delivery man, Minato, was thinking that Suge looked like a shut-in old man. Suge froze in shock. For a moment, he had no idea what was happening, until he remembered what Adachi had told him. That was right. Yesterday had been his 30th birthday, and he was still a virgin. Just then, Udon wandered over. Minato's expression immediately softened when he saw the cat, and he asked politely if he could pet him. Suge gave permission, and Minato happily crouched down beside the cat. Apparently, he had once seen Udon stranded and alone in the rain. Seeing the cat safe and cared for now made him relieved. In Minato's mind, he even admitted that Suge wasn't as bad as he had first thought. Hearing those thoughts while watching Minato's warm smile made Suge blush intensely. The sudden emotional overload was too much, and he dropped to his knees. Oh my god, is this a gay subplot? Hours later, Suge still couldn't concentrate on writing. Minato's smile just kept replaying in his mind, making it impossible to focus. Just as he forced himself to try again, the doorbell rang once more. When he opened the door, Minato was standing there again. However, he was more interested in seeing Udon than talking to Suge. When Suge offered to show him the cat, Minato's face lit up with excitement, which only made Suge blush again. As Udon played nearby with a toy, Minato noticed that the cat had grown bigger. Suge casually explained that he had named the cat Udon because he found himself inside a box of udon noodles. The explanation made it obvious he hadn't put much thought into the name. At first, Suge had only taken the cat in because he couldn't leave him behind. But now, he genuinely found Udon adorable. Bringing out a cat treat, Suge asked if Minato wanted to feed him. Minato admitted that he had initially thought Suge seemed shady, but now he could see he was actually a good owner. While feeding Udon, Suge awkwardly invited Minato to come visit again sometime, since the cat seemed to miss him. With an innocent smile, Minato agreed. Unfortunately for Suge, that smile was far too powerful for his heart to handle. That night, Suge met Adachi at a bar. Adachi excitedly talked about the karaoke night when Kurosawa had come to his rescue. Suge noticed something unusual. Adachi seemed to enjoy how Kurosawa had overshadowed him. It was the first time Adachi had shared such a lively story about his job. Until turning 30, Adachi's life had been extremely routine. Every day, he simply traveled between home and the office, living quietly in the background. But ever since gaining the strange mind-reading power, his life had suddenly become full of surprises. After leaving the bar, Suge tried to talk about his own magical ability, but couldn't find the right words. Suddenly, they noticed Kurosawa across the street, being bothered by a woman who insisted on staying over at his place, even though she apparently had a boyfriend. Seeing this scene immediately changed Adachi's mood. Without saying much, he decided to go home. On the way back, he assumed the woman must be Kurosawa's ex-girlfriend. The thought that he had past relationships unexpectedly hurt him. The next day, Kurosawa was surprised to learn that Adachi had taken the day off from work. Adachi had caught a cold from standing in the rain the night before and had gone to bed without even changing his wet clothes. He was being too dramatic last night. When he checked his refrigerator, the only things inside were a can of beer and some strawberry jam. Returning to bed, he started imagining Kurosawa spending the night with the woman from yesterday. It wasn't strange that someone like Kurosawa had ex-girlfriends, but the thought bothered him more than he expected. He blamed the uncomfortable feeling on his fever. His mind wandered back to a painful memory from 5 years earlier, when he had gone drinking with a girl he liked and some coworkers. During the outing, he overheard the girl saying he might be too much trouble to date. Their relationship ended before it even began, and the experience left Adachi deeply insecure about romance. Ever since then, he had become cowardly when it came to love, expecting rejection before anything even started. Just then, the sound of the doorbell woke him from his thoughts. When he opened the door, he was shocked to see Kurosawa standing there. Kurosawa had been worried because Adachi hadn't shown up at work and hadn't answered his phone. Tons of missed calls from Kurosawa. Adachi apologized, explaining that he had been asleep the whole time. Kurosawa immediately offered to cook something for him, and Adachi had little choice but to let him inside. Soon, Adachi was happily eating the meal Kurosawa prepared. He admitted he hadn't eaten anything all day and didn't know whether he still had a fever. Kurosawa leaned forward and touched their foreheads together to check his temperature, catching Adachi off guard. Thankfully, the fever had already passed. Afterward, Kurosawa washed the dishes while Adachi watched in confusion. Kurosawa was handsome, popular, and apparently had a beautiful ex-girlfriend. Yet, he was spending his time worrying about Adachi. Before leaving, Kurosawa told him to visit the hospital the next day. Adachi was deeply moved. No one except his family had ever taken such care of him while he was sick. He couldn't understand why Kurosawa would go through all the trouble for him. But Kurosawa insisted that Adachi wasn't lame at all. In fact, he believed whoever dated Adachi would be incredibly lucky. Someone who experienced Adachi's first date, first meal together, and first time holding hands would surely treasure those moments. And reading his mind, if Kurosawa was the one sharing all of Adachi's firsts, he would cherish it deeply. Adachi was left speechless. For years, he had felt embarrassed about having no romantic experience. But hearing Kurosawa say those words made him realize something important. Maybe he wouldn't mind experiencing those firsts with him. At that moment, Adachi finally understood why seeing Kurosawa with the woman the night before had upset him. Just as he was about to confess his feelings, the woman from the previous night suddenly appeared. However, she wasn't Kurosawa's ex-girlfriend at all. She was actually his older sister, Mari. Now that Adachi looked closely, he could see the resemblance. The realization filled him with relief. Seeing how close Adachi and her brother seemed, Mari casually suggested that he stay at Adachi's place while she used his apartment. Oh my god. Kurosawa immediately began imagining what life with Adachi would be like, and quickly agreed. Before Adachi had even the chance to object, he somehow ended up with a brand new roommate. When Mari left, Kurosawa would apologize to Adachi for the sudden inconvenience. He decided to stay over at a business hotel. Adachi suddenly sneezed, getting him worried. So, Kurosawa pushed him back in so he could get into bed. However, he'd suddenly fall over Adachi on the bed. Both froze, staring at each other. Flustered, Kurosawa didn't know what to do. He couldn't help but be charmed by Adachi's features. Fighting between desire and reason, he then got off, telling Adachi to get some sleep. In some ways, Adachi was kind of amazed by Kurosawa. The next morning, he had gotten over his cold. He'd be shocked to see Kurosawa sleeping right next to the bed. Looking at the table, he saw the items Kurosawa had used to take care of him. Adachi had only ever had family take care of him while he was sick. It made him realize how much Kurosawa liked him. He then woke him up, warning Kurosawa he might catch a cold from him. But of course, Kurosawa didn't mind. Pulling Adachi closer, he turned the tables on him. They'd take the train to work, and as usual, it was so packed. As it swayed, tossing everyone around, Kurosawa was suddenly having Adachi back to the wall. Freaking out, he thought they looked like a couple. He'd eventually calm himself down. Hearing all his thoughts, Adachi was amazed at how they never showed on Kurosawa's face. Having to deal with all the negative voices on the train was hell for Adachi. But this was a nice change of things. He complimented Kurosawa on his pleasant voice. At the office, after Adachi had helped Nozomi with the computer, he came across some girls, gushing over Kurosawa. He looked like he was waiting for someone. Adachi knew it was none other than himself. He'd been so busy since yesterday that he forgot how much Kurosawa liked him. Plus, he was fond of Kurosawa as well. Realizing the two of them were about to go home together, Adachi panicked. He wished he had like a week or even a day to think things over. Startled by Yuta's presence, he squealed. Then, Yuta mentioned seeing him and Kurosawa on the train. That's when Kurosawa came by, bragging about Adachi letting him stay at his place. It sounded like a lot of fun, so Yuta wanted to come stay over as well. Seeing this as his chance, Adachi agreed, and Kurosawa was stunned beyond words. Over at Adachi's place, their hangout somehow turned into a takoyaki party. Yuta cooked up his specialty and gave Adachi some to taste. Seeing that Adachi loved it, Kurosawa decided to cook the next batch. He definitely wasn't about to be outdone, and luckily, they both loved his takoyaki. He was a great cook. Adachi would even remind him of the excellent breakfast he made before, but Kurosawa didn't really see himself that way. He then handed over an extra can of beer to Adachi. Upon collecting, Adachi could see that Kurosawa wasn't about to let Yuta win him over. Eventually, Adachi started getting tired of the food. However, Yuta was well prepared for that. He'd bring out an extremely spicy hot sauce for the next round. Seeing that Kurosawa didn't mind, Adachi touched him lightly to read his thoughts. Turns out that Kurosawa couldn't handle spicy food, but he didn't want to look lame in front of Adachi. When Yuta was done with the takoyaki, Adachi decided to read his mind, so Kurosawa wouldn't pick the extra spicy death takoyaki. Meanwhile, Kurosawa was fantasizing about how cute Adachi would look when he ate something spicy. In the end, he ended up with the spicy one. That's what he gets for trying to set up Adachi. Afterwards, Yuta helped with the cleanup. Noticing how adept he was, Adachi asked if he was into anything during his time in school. Apparently, Yuta was part of the dance club in college. They usually held barbecues and went to the beach together. However, Adachi wasn't impressed. Currently, Yuta had his job and didn't really have time for dancing. The best guy from his year was still dancing, but also had a part-time job. From the looks of it, Yuta wasn't so bothered, but on the inside, he still dreamt about it. Recalling those times dancing with his group, he definitely wasn't over it. Reading his thoughts, Adachi suggested he could still dance sometimes. After all, he was good enough to participate in a tournament. And so, Yuta decided to get in touch with his friend. Later on, after Yuta was asleep, Kurosawa would meet Adachi in the kitchen doing the dishes. Adachi spoke about how Yuta used to dance in college. He even called him cute. Kurosawa didn't take that lightly though. He'd suddenly turn off the tap and firmly place his hands on the sink. Oh, the last thing he wanted was to hear Adachi talk about Yuta. Adachi had never even looked him in the eyes or complimented him before. What was so special about Yuta anyway? Kurosawa thought he was handier, wasn't a playboy, and was nice too. Adachi was only meant to have eyes for him. He'd suddenly grab Adachi's hand. Adachi then turned around, saying he must have had too much to drink. However, Kurosawa asked him what he was about to say last night before his sister showed up. In that moment, Adachi felt like he had to respond to Kurosawa's feelings, but Kurosawa had no idea he had the ability to read minds. So, it would be hard for Adachi to explain himself. Before he could say a word, Yuta came, asking for water, and that was just the save Adachi needed. How long could he keep running away from this? It only made Kurosawa more anxious. With Yuta missing the last train, he'd have to sleep over. Adachi only had one futon, and after what happened at the sink, he wanted to avoid sleeping beside Kurosawa by all means. However, sharing the space with Yuta would also lead to more headaches. On the other hand, Kurosawa wanted to sleep with Adachi, but wasn't sure he'd be able to hold himself back. Not like he could stand Yuta sleeping with him as well. Surprisingly, Yuta offered to sleep on the floor, but Adachi wouldn't let him do that. Yuta then suggested they share the futon. Refusing to let that happen, Kurosawa told him that sharing a futon with his senior would make him anxious. In the end, Adachi slept alone while Kurosawa and Yuta were on the floor. In the middle of the night, Adachi recalled how strong Kurosawa's grip was. He couldn't stop thinking about how much of a man Kurosawa was. He spent the whole night thinking about how to explain things to Kurosawa. He seemed very bothered by it. Nozomi then came by to cross-check some data. Adachi thought she looked so cute and smelled nice. If a girl like her fell for him, he wouldn't be so bothered. When she leaned in, he got a glimpse of her thoughts, which happened to be something about so much love for Adachi. The truth was, she was thinking about how Kurosawa had so much love for Adachi. Oh no, it's my viewers personified again. She is gasping and heaving over their freaky BL romance potential. All she did was get close, and he was staring so much. The thought of one of them getting punished in a naughty way made her squeal. Recalling that the two of them came to work together, she assumed they lived together as well. This was enough to give her energy to work through the afternoon. Nozomi was a genuine fujoshi. On the other hand, poor Adachi thought Nozomi liked him. It sounded too convenient. He had to be wrong about it. To confirm it, he'd peek into her thoughts again. She was thinking that Adachi was more of her type, but that wasn't the full story. He'd pull his hand away before her thoughts were finished. She thought he and Kurosawa were the perfect couple. while he kept only getting half of her thoughts. Nozomi was in a world of her own, having depraved imaginations about them. The thought of Nozomi liking him made Adachi so nervous. Maybe it wasn't that he was in love with Kurosawa, but was just happy that someone liked him. On their way home, Adachi was so lost in thought, he nearly walked into traffic. That's when Kurosawa would save him. Finally, Kurosawa came clean, confessing his love for Adachi. He had liked him ever since Adachi took care of him last year when he was drunk. That moment really mattered to him. Knowing someone saw him for who he really was relieved him. Adachi had touched his heart, and from that moment, Kurosawa fell in love. He apologized for suddenly springing this up on him. Kurosawa decided to head back to his place. Adachi wanted to stop him, but what should he say? It's true that he tried to reciprocate Kurosawa's love then. Regardless, he was also scared. Was he moved by Kurosawa's affection, or did he actually like him? Unable to reconcile his thoughts, Adachi didn't know what to do. At the office the next day, Adachi found out that Kurosawa had gone away on a business trip, though he was relieved not having to see his face. Recalling what happened last night, Adachi thought himself as the worst. Nozomi would suddenly trip in front of him, spilling her documents. While helping her out, he heard her panicking about not being able to make it in time, so he offered to help her. She had received last-minute corrections to the documents for a meeting, but together, he felt they'd finish in a snap. Nozomi noted how close he and Kurosawa were. Apparently, Kurosawa would be returning from his work trip tonight. She then told Adachi to ask him to turn in his receipts. Her charming smile left him thinking about how cute she was. Adachi didn't know much about her personality, but she was earnest. Remembering how she was always reading, he saw her as a good, studious girl. At least, the reading part was true. Except she was only engrossed in one of her gay boy love books. When some of the papers fell to the ground, Nozomi rushed to pick them up. Using that chance, he'd read her mind. She was thinking about how he looked down today, and of course, he only heard that part of it. She figured it was because of Kurosawa's absence. On the other hand, Adachi thought she was worried about him. He was unsure if she really liked him. This was his first time experiencing anything like this in 30 years. If by chance his relationship with her progressed, then he could lose his virginity and this weird magic power. Unlike Nozomi, Kurosawa was bigger than him and obnoxiously handsome. He was secretly a pervert too, and surprisingly jealous. Plus, he was a man. Dating him would probably be a pain for Adachi. Meanwhile, Kurosawa had never thought he'd confess his feelings to Adachi. He knew Adachi liked kind, clean-cut girls. Kurosawa thought he wouldn't appreciate a coworker declaring his love for him out of the blue. All he wanted was to simply be at Adachi's side forever. Since the day Adachi stayed at his place, he had become more aware of Kurosawa, and Kurosawa had gotten greedy. He wanted to spend more time with him, touch him, and he wanted Adachi to love him. Never before had he been so consumed by thoughts of someone else. Since he'd been watching him, he could tell Adachi would fall for Nozomi. Kurosawa had confessed his feelings to get over him, but it seemed he only caused more trouble for Adachi. Feeling bad for Kurosawa, Adachi thought to apologize to him so they could go back to how things were. Thinking about it now, there was no way things could go back to normal. Remembering how Kurosawa called his name, Adachi finally made up his mind. He suddenly rushed out, running through the streets. No matter how many times he tried to deny it, he couldn't stop thinking about the thoughts he heard every time he touched Kurosawa. The only thoughts in his head were Kurosawa's. Soon enough, he finally met him. After apologizing for running away all this time, Adachi struggled to find the next words to say. Kurosawa was a man. Sometimes, he was kind of scary. It would probably be easier for them to remain coworkers. No one had been able to touch Kurosawa's heart before, and Adachi wanted to know more. Mustering the courage, he finally confessed, "I'm in love with you too!" A great joy washed over Kurosawa at that moment. Dropping his bag, he hugged Adachi tightly. Both were flush. Kurosawa's wordless emotions were pouring into Adachi's mind. His heart was racing. It sounded ridiculous to say 30 years of virginity could make one a wizard, but every time Adachi touched Kurosawa's heart, he felt like one. As people passed by and saw them, Adachi began feeling embarrassed. On the other hand, Kurosawa didn't care. Right now, both his voice of reason and desire agreed they couldn't bear to let go of Adachi's warmth, scent, and physical body. They'd let go of each other just in time as Asahina came by. Returning to the office, Kurosawa and Adachi would act naturally around each other. But Adachi was so nervous. Now that he was aware of Kurosawa, it was hard to stop thinking about it. He thought people who engaged in office romances were crazy. Safe to say, he was in the same category now. While he was getting a drink, Nozomi came to thank him for reminding Kurosawa about the receipts. He still thought she liked him. Then, she teased that she'd have him help with Kurosawa all the time from now on. Seeing that he didn't mind, Nozomi shone brightly as she thanked him. He felt guilty about all this. On the other hand, she could sense something happened between him and Kurosawa. To celebrate, she'd be having red rice tonight. Later, while Kurosawa received some documents from Adachi, he sparkled with gratitude. Before Adachi left, he gave him a treat, knowing he liked sweet things. As all that went on, Yuta stared at them suspiciously. He noticed they'd been spending a lot of time together recently, and also felt like Kurosawa talked to him a lot whenever he was with Adachi. It happened so many times that Yuta already had an idea of what was going on. Kurosawa then approached him, letting him know that Adachi had been checking his emails for errors. So, he asked him to be more careful. Seeing how Kurosawa watched Adachi closely, Yuta finally figured it out. He assumed they were working together using a carrot and stick method to help him improve. Seems Nozomi wasn't the only weirdo in this office. We turn to Suge, who got comments about his new heroine. Here we go, back with a subplot. I usually hate these, but I don't mind because Suge's dynamic is entertaining. The heroine he wrote was much different than his regular mysterious girls. She was more like Minato. Recently, Suge had been ordering more things online, and he felt empty when a different delivery person came. But whenever he saw Minato, his heart raced fast. There was only one explanation. This was love. Coming to terms with this was hard for Suge. It shouldn't be possible. Minato was a man and a delinquent. Soon enough, Suge found himself interested in how-to books for romance. Walking through the streets, he recalled that all he knew about Minato was that he was a delivery man who liked cats. But every time he saw Minato's face, his heart started pounding, and it affected his writing. Out of nowhere, Minato showed up next to him. Calming himself down, Suge decided to ascertain his desires and win his affection by smartly suggesting a social activity. As Minato picked something off his shirt, Suge heard him thinking about how thirsty he was. So, he suggested they go get some tea, but Minato would decline, thinking he was weird. He was out shopping for some shoes. He was a dancer, but whatever Suge was imagining, it wasn't that. Minato was trying to go pro, so he burned through his shoes quickly. Sometimes, he was a backup dancer for singers. However, he didn't see it as awesome as Suge did. His former college club members had all found jobs. He was the only one who didn't give up on dancing, but he knew this wasn't something he could do forever. Maybe it was about time he called it quits. Suge understood how he felt, given he always wanted to be an author. When he was assigned an editor in college, he got carried away. Instead of getting a job, he kept writing, and no matter how much he wrote, he didn't receive a single award then. Doubting your own abilities and the fear of being an outcast, he knew them all too well. So, he figured Minato didn't really want to give up. After all, he wouldn't be practicing until his shoes fell apart if he actually wanted to stop. Surprisingly, Minato would thank him for the advice. Before leaving, he properly introduced himself. Hearing his name, Suge thought it was cute. He knew he had lost his mind the moment he wanted to buy Minato all the shoes he wanted. Back home, Adachi lay on the ground, completely exhausted. He still couldn't believe he confessed his feelings in the street and hugged Kurosawa. The next moment, Kurosawa rang his line. Hearing his voice, Adachi was flush. It all still felt like a dream to Kurosawa, but it wasn't. Adachi liked him. He wondered what kind of expression Kurosawa was making now. Because he couldn't read his thoughts, hearing Kurosawa's voice over the phone made him nervous. Kurosawa invited Adachi to go out somewhere this weekend as a way to show gratitude for letting him stay over. Once he had decided on a place, he'd let Adachi know. After the call, Adachi realized he was about to go on a date. Finally, Kurosawa had scored a date with Adachi. Despite fantasizing about it over 1,000 times, he never thought it would actually happen. Pinching himself, he made sure he wasn't dreaming. Since this would be Adachi's first date, he was determined to make it unforgettable. Meanwhile, Adachi was spiraling, clueless about what to wear or what people even did on dates. He went searching the internet, but all the pictures he saw were of normies having fun. On the day of their date, Adachi's scream could be heard from the next street. He overslept, and now he was frantically trying to get himself ready. He thought about wearing an accessory, but he didn't even own any. In the end, he wore his regular clothes. He overslept because he could barely get any sleep last night. Then, Adachi let Kurosawa know that he'd be about 10 minutes late. Luckily, Kurosawa didn't mind. Soon enough, Adachi met up with him. Kurosawa dazzled in his clothes, looking more handsome than ever. He was way out of Adachi's league in his mind. Adachi didn't even want to be standing next to him. He felt he himself could have dressed up more properly. However, it didn't seem to bother Kurosawa at all. As a matter of fact, he admired Adachi's bedhead. He thought Adachi's clothes were cute and loved the fact that they were wearing matching hoodies. As for where they would go, Adachi didn't make any plans, so Kurosawa would take his hand, leading him. And in his head, he was already performing a musical about their special date. His insanely mushy lyrics made Adachi throw up on the spot. Adachi complimented how stylish he was, unlike himself, who had no idea what to wear. Kurosawa thought he looked good, but suggested they go check out some clothes. Excited by this, Adachi even asked him to pick out clothes for him. It was like a dream come true for Kurosawa. But seeing his thoughts, Adachi was about to cancel. However, he couldn't say no to Kurosawa's cute puppy face. Getting to a luxurious clothing store, he felt out of place. Kurosawa asked what kind of clothing he preferred. Adachi was okay with anything that was easy to move in and age appropriate. So, Adachi brought out some light jackets he could try on. Testing them out, Adachi looked great in them. Thanks to his pale skin, Kurosawa felt dark colors went well. However, Adachi was too broke to afford it, but he needn't worry. Kurosawa would pay as a way to commemorate their first date. Just seeing Adachi wear the clothes he chose made him so happy. Regardless, Adachi chose to pay for it, handing over his card. The owner thought that the only reason a man would give someone clothes was that he wanted to undress them. What? But he hoped Adachi would be cautious. Their date continued with them going to different beautiful sceneries, and in each of them, Kurosawa was more than happy to be with Adachi. Stopping by the market street, they'd have liked steamed buns for lunch. Kurosawa had made dinner reservations at an Italian restaurant with a view of the ocean. Then, he left to get them some drinks. Two girls came by, gushing over Kurosawa's hot looks. One of them thought about talking to him when he got back, but her friend pointed out that he and Adachi looked like a couple. However, they didn't think the guys were a good match. Adachi also recalled the old man who picked up on their date back in the clothing store. When Kurosawa came back, he noticed Adachi was spacing out. He'd grab his hand, but Adachi suddenly pulled away. He then apologized for grabbing him suddenly. Although they were on a date, Adachi wasn't so sure about how close they should be acting. He was trying to act like he normally did, but hearing Kurosawa's voice made his heart leap. There was no way he could go back to just being colleagues. Before dinner, Kurosawa planned for them to go for a special walk in the sky. He had prepared a helicopter ride for them, and also roses for Adachi. This was all so they could have a private chat. Wild first date idea, but okay. Without giving it a moment's thought, Adachi agreed to ride with him, even though he was terrified of helicopters. Being so high up, Adachi was completely frightened. Kurosawa was glad he was able to have fun on his first date. He loved Adachi's smile. Trembling with fear though, Adachi then told him he couldn't handle this helicopter ride. When they got out, Kurosawa apologized for making him do that, but it wasn't his fault. Adachi blamed himself for being a scared chicken. As for their dinner reservation, Kurosawa canceled. Adachi wasn't looking so good, so he decided they should go home. Despite being late, Kurosawa wasn't mad at him. He was kind and smooth the whole time. But Adachi was very nervous and left all the date planning to him. His clothes were lame, and he wouldn't even hold Kurosawa's hand. To top it all off, he ruined their helicopter ride. Adachi believed he wasn't good enough to date him. On the other hand, Kurosawa felt like an idiot for not noticing how scared Adachi was. He blamed himself for getting carried away and felt embarrassed for failing to match Adachi's rhythm. Like Adachi, he didn't get enough sleep as well and felt nervous. Moments later, they got to Adachi's place. The car would have to leave quickly because of another vehicle waiting behind. So, Kurosawa wasn't able to say much before bidding farewell. Adachi thought Kurosawa looked really dejected at that moment. He hadn't sounded that hurt in a while. He could tell because of his powers. But Kurosawa was probably still anxious. Next time, he'd come clean with his feelings. Until now, Adachi was so scared of being disliked that he'd run at the first sign of failure. He avoided interacting with others. But if Kurosawa was hurt, he wanted to fix it. The next day at the office, Kurosawa looked like he was barely holding on to life. He'd snap back to normal as Adachi approached him. Adachi would apologize for yesterday. Then, he asked if Kurosawa would be free after work. Later, they'd head out together. Thinking about the worst, Kurosawa wouldn't be surprised if he got dumped. But that wasn't the case at all. They went to a comic book store where Adachi talked about the Zombie Dead comic that was going on sale. They'd spend the rest of the time there, checking out action figures. And the night ended with some drinks. All the while, Kurosawa wondered what Adachi was thinking. On their way back home, Adachi mentioned that he had no idea why couples went on dates. He honestly wished normies would go play in traffic. Dang, that's a bit much. Turns out, he was just jealous. Kurosawa had never actually thought about that before. He always assumed his strategy of researching things the other person would like was working, but that was because there wasn't anything he wanted to do with them. During their date yesterday, all Adachi could think about was what people thought of them, but that didn't matter. He appreciated Kurosawa for trying to make sure he had fun. Nevertheless, it didn't make sense if Kurosawa wasn't having fun as well. Adachi wanted to have fun with him. They went to the bookstore and restaurant because they were the only interests he knew they had in common. Adachi's casual remarks always lifted up Kurosawa's spirits. Maybe he really was a wizard. There were a lot of things and places Kurosawa wanted to go with Adachi, but he was afraid he'd be disliked if he spoke about it. Now, Adachi was scared about what this guy wanted to do with him. Although it would take some time, he promised to do his best, a little bit at a time. Next time, they'd decide what to do together. The next moment, Adachi tripped. Luckily, Kurosawa was there to save him. He was flush as Adachi agreed to hold his hand, at least till they got to the station. Both were blushing hard as they walked together. Noticing the full moon, Kurosawa wondered if Adachi knew the romantic meaning of "the moon is beautiful tonight." Unknowingly, Adachi responded to that. However, he was able to play it off, saying Kurosawa had too much to drink. Kurosawa thought he had read his mind, but didn't believe that could be possible. Adachi would suddenly let go, pretending he saw Yuta. Soon enough, the guilt started eating him up. How long could he keep dating Kurosawa without telling the truth? And how would Kurosawa react if he found out Adachi was a wizard? Oh no, is this going to be a main conflict? I'm gonna be honest, if I was Adachi, I probably wouldn't ever tell him. A month after their first date, Adachi still wasn't sure whether to tell Kurosawa that he could hear his thoughts. Although they'd been too busy to meet, he also never found the courage to tell him the truth. Whether it was okay to keep dating Kurosawa while keeping this a secret, he wasn't sure. Kurosawa met Yuta, asking if he'd been told the date of the customer panel. Adachi would then come over, asking what that was about. Kurosawa explained they were looking for customer panel participants for the company's upcoming men's strength training equipment. The date stated for it was July 3rd. It was the same day as Kurosawa's birthday, meaning he and Adachi wouldn't be the same age for long. Until Adachi's birthday on March 21st next year, Kurosawa would be 262 days older than him. For some reason, it got him excited. Sadly, they didn't have enough participants. Yuta mentioned that they needed data on people who did and didn't exercise regularly. So, Adachi and Kurosawa would agree to reach out to their friends. Afterward, Adachi felt Kurosawa was the type who was particular about what they liked. Due to that, he was unsure about what to get as a birthday present. He'd have to use his powers to figure out. Kurosawa was thinking about his earphones, which he had mistakenly dropped. So, Adachi figured that would make a good present. Since Kurosawa was always on the go and listening to music, he decided to get him some wireless ones with a long battery life. However, Kurosawa would catch him hovering around, thanks to the reflection from the screen. Over at the club, Minato's dance skills were making the crowd go wild. While taking pictures, Suge totally felt out of place. He only came because he wanted to see Minato dance. The manager approached him, asking if he was secretly taking pictures of the dancers. That's when Minato showed up to defend Suge, explaining that he was an author. He told the man he brought Suge here because he wanted to gather material. But the manager told Suge to try dancing if he really wanted something like that. The matter would escalate. Not wanting to cause trouble for Minato, Suge accepted the challenge. Within 5 seconds, he had tripped over his feet, completely embarrassing himself. While he lay on the couch, Minato came to check on him, wondering why he had attempted something so difficult. Despite Suge's weirdness, Minato admired how bold he was. Hearing that was enough to make Suge not regret coming here. Minato admired the pictures, seeing the face he made while dancing. He hardly ever saw himself, since he was always a backup dancer. Given that the vocalist was the main focus, no one took these kinds of pictures of him. Suge would compliment his beautiful dancing, making him blush. Recalling when Suge said he didn't want to give up, Minato admitted he was right. Refusing to limit himself any longer, he went for a major audition he thought he'd fail, but actually made it to the final round. It was all thanks to Suge's advice. Suddenly, he'd moved to take off his glasses, thinking Suge looked hot without them. Suge was so flustered in that moment, he fell to his knees. Then, Adachi's text came in, asking if he knew anyone athletic who could participate in the panel for strength training equipment. Days later, Adachi was so anxious, wondering how to give Kurosawa his birthday gift. He'd never given a birthday present to anyone besides his parents. Mustering the courage, he greeted Kurosawa and handed him the gift. Aww. Kurosawa was excited to see the new wireless earphones. After all, he'd lost his previous ones. He loved them and thanked Adachi for the gift. Seeing how handy his powers were, Adachi figured he might not need to tell Kurosawa after all. As all the participants arrived, they began testing the different equipment that had been set out. Soon after, Suge showed up, bringing Minato with him. He then told Adachi that he'd like to speak with him later. Following that, Minato went to test out the equipment, and he performed excellently. Adachi would be shocked, seeing Suge balance well, too. Apparently, Suge had been working out. Adachi had a feel of his rock-hard abs, and upon seeing that, Kurosawa angrily snapped the power twister bar in his hands. No way was Suge going to take his man. He approached them, asking who Suge was. Adachi explained that he had invited him, so Kurosawa thanked him for coming. An awkward air lingered as both stared at each other. Adachi then properly introduced Suge as his only friend from college and an author as well. And as for Kurosawa, there was no way he was about to introduce him as his boyfriend. Suge hoped Adachi wasn't causing too much trouble at the office. However, Kurosawa would praise Adachi, calling him a diligent and careful worker. He believed Adachi's shortcomings were all a part of his charm. When participants were done, they were given a URL and a code to scan so they could access the survey. Yuta would be shocked to see Minato here. These two were in the same dance club in college. He praised Minato's dancing, mentioning that he still performed as a backup dancer for singers. Suge had no idea one of Minato's acquaintances worked here. Adachi noticed he seemed distressed, which was very unlike him. Suge thought love had simply made a fool out of him. Adachi couldn't believe his ears. How was Suge talking about love? Even more surprising was the fact that they were talking to each other telepathically. Later, Suge explained he had gained the power to read minds on his 30th birthday. At first, when Adachi mentioned it, he thought it was a joke. He never thought it had happened to him too. Kurosawa would eavesdrop on them, and at that moment, he heard Suge saying, "I think I've been in love since we first met." Kurosawa assumed he was in love with Adachi. In order for no one to hear them, Adachi and Suge continued the conversation telepathically. It was surprising to hear that Suge hadn't confessed his feelings to Minato yet. Adachi knew him as someone who always said what was on his mind. Suge was truly in love, but feared Minato would hate him if he revealed the truth. Adachi advised him to have more confidence in himself. Suge was good looking. Besides, Minato wouldn't have followed him here if he didn't like him, but still, Suge was very anxious. Adachi was keeping secrets from Kurosawa as well. He'd been telling himself that it was for Kurosawa's sake, but the truth was, he also feared Kurosawa would hate him if the truth came out. It seemed just like yesterday that he used to run from Kurosawa's feelings, and now he had fallen so hard for him. He would thank Suge for telling him and smile cheerfully. A wave of sadness washed over Kurosawa. Seeing Adachi smile, he had never smiled like that before when they were together. On their way back, Kurosawa suddenly dragged Adachi away. Hovering over him, he asked if Adachi really loved him. Adachi didn't get why he was asking this while they were still at work, but he also didn't give a clear answer to the question. Kurosawa feared Adachi was in love with someone else. Seeing that he was talking about Suge, Adachi explained they were just friends. There was no way he'd fall in love with Suge. Regardless, Kurosawa's anxiety wouldn't go away so easily. Finally, he asked if Adachi was hiding something. Adachi acted totally different when he was with him. Unlike with Suge being in love with Kurosawa, he was afraid to tell the truth. But he finally did. He let Kurosawa know he was a boring wizard who could read the minds of anyone he touched. It didn't make sense to Kurosawa. So, Adachi would grab his arm, responding to his thoughts. He revealed that he knew all of what Kurosawa had been thinking about him, including his fantasy of seeing Adachi in pajamas. At first, Adachi was weirded out by it, but every time he read Kurosawa's mind, he got excited, and at some point, he fell for him. As the words left his mouth, he regretted each one. But now, Kurosawa could see the real him. Hearing that Adachi had known about his feelings since the day he slept over, Kurosawa felt so embarrassed. Rather than get upset, he felt glad that Adachi was able to find out his true feelings. He then grabbed Adachi's hand, slowly running his fingers along them. Adachi's heart raced. Tension heightened between them. Kurosawa loved how soft he was. He wanted to touch him more. He loved him so much. Then, they shared their first passionate kiss. Suddenly, Adachi couldn't hear anything anymore. Only the sound of his pounding heart filled his ears. Kurosawa would lean in for another kiss, but Adachi's heart couldn't take any more. So, they agreed to head back. On their way, Kurosawa figured Adachi had given him those earphones because he knew about the lost ones. Adachi apologized, explaining that he didn't know what would make a good gift, but as long as it came from him, Kurosawa would love anything. Despite how much he put himself down, he thought Adachi had a lot of good qualities. He just didn't realize it. Kurosawa told him to stop saying things like that about himself. Dazzling with irresistible charm, he asked Adachi to trust him. He would show him all his good qualities. As for a birthday present, Kurosawa got what he wanted most: their first kiss. Adachi was flushed just thinking about it. Meanwhile, Minato told Suge to hurry up with the survey. Suge noticed he and Yuta were quite distant for people who had known each other since college. It looked more like Minato was avoiding him. If Suge had known about this, he wouldn't have asked Minato out to come here. Yuta then approached him, offering to help. So, Suge asked for help with the QR code. Minato took that as his cue to leave. Suge would hear Yuta's thoughts, and apparently, he noticed Minato was avoiding him. It was expected. After all, Yuta was the one who quit the dance club to find a job. Unlike Minato, he believed he didn't have any talent. When the panel was done, Asahina asked Yuta for the survey results. While doing so, Kurosawa and Adachi finally came back to help. Took them long enough. They were too busy in the back. Yuta would soon spot a gift bag that was left behind. Following that, Suge met up with Minato. Seeing that Minato wasn't with his gift, he asked about it, but Minato left it behind, claiming he didn't need it. Running into his old classmate here was quite coincidental. Minato mentioned how they used to goof off back in college. Now, Yuta was wearing a suit and working in a big office, unlike him, who still just worked part-time. Suge knew this feeling all too well. Before becoming successful, he felt pathetic for having nothing compared to Adachi and his proper job. Because of that, he avoided Adachi for some time. However, Minato's and Yuta's situation was different. They were both confused. Suge thought about mediating their conflict, but what good would it do? He decided it was best to simply empathize with Minato. He understood the situation, having experienced something similar, but he let Minato know that it was hard to come by college friends one could speak frankly with. This went both ways for them. Yuta would come running to Minato, returning the gift he left behind. Minato teased him, saying he was so out of shape, unlike before. He invited Yuta to come dance sometime, saying he still had his shoes. Yuta was relieved to see that they were good, and Minato wasn't avoiding him. He was as lively as ever, and it put a smile on Minato's face. Seeing that smile was enough for Suge, even if he was put at a disadvantage. Walking the streets together, Minato leaned on Suge's back, thanking him for the advice. Face turning red, Suge's heart pounded heavily. Minato wondered how he knew his thoughts. Regardless, he loved how kind and masculine Suge was. Suge was a safe space, and he felt he could show his weak side to him. Suge's blush was wiped right off when he realized Minato thought of him as a dad. Even an older brother would have been better. Back at the office, while Kurosawa was flirting with Adachi, Asahina showed the manager the program Adachi had developed. Unbeknownst to Adachi, the manager planned to send him to the new branch in Nagasaki. Ever since Kurosawa found out about Adachi's powers, he began using his thoughts to communicate. The sudden reminder about their date startled Adachi. Kurosawa apologized. He was just so excited to go to a concert with him. Noticing the smell of the conditioner he suggested, he told Adachi it was nice, and always knew it would suit him. At this point, he was using the mind-reading powers better than the supposed wizard. After that, the manager called Adachi to his office. Anxiety started building up inside him. What could he have possibly screwed up this time? Or worse, did the manager find out about him and Kurosawa? The manager complimented him, saying he'd gotten sharper since he'd been spending more time with Kurosawa. Hearing that, Adachi began sweating buckets. He'd suddenly apologized without having heard anything else from the manager. The last thing he expected to hear was the manager asking if he wanted to transfer to the new branch in Nagasaki. Adachi was left stunned. The manager then gave him some time to think about it. Honestly, it wasn't a bad offer. It came with a raise and a housing allowance. Of course, it wouldn't have been possible without his powers and Kurosawa as well. But taking the offer would mean leaving Kurosawa here. He couldn't imagine doing that. The distance was a 10-hour trip, so Adachi wouldn't be able to travel easily back and forth. But this wasn't the time to get distracted. He decided to focus on work and talk about it later during their date. So, he started searching for documents Yuta asked for. Yuta pointed out that it was last year's data, not the current one. So much for becoming sharper. Adachi would have to stay back and work overtime. Kurosawa called him after getting the message. He offered to come to the office to help out, but Adachi declined. The guilt ate him up, especially given that Kurosawa just got the tickets for the concert he'd been wanting to go to. He promised to make it up to him later. Adachi hoped he was alright. Not seeing Kurosawa's face made him anxious. Kurosawa was good at pretending to be perfect. If Adachi transferred, they'd be spending all their time apart, and he was too dense to figure out how Kurosawa felt without touching him. Asahina would come by shortly after, and Adachi explained the situation. He advised him to pull himself together, since he might be transferring. Then, Adachi asked for a moment of his time. The next morning, Kurosawa noticed Adachi wasn't in the office. He met with Asahina, who told him about Adachi declining the transfer offer. This was the first time Kurosawa had heard anything about this. In the storeroom, Adachi was trying to recover from his hangover. Apparently, he and Asahina spoke over drinks. He then got a text from Kurosawa, asking if they could talk after work. In the evening, Adachi met up with him and immediately apologized after yesterday. He was relieved to see that Kurosawa was okay. Seeing his face put him at ease. The thought of being away from Kurosawa was unbearable. Kurosawa would pop the question, asking if he was really turning down the offer to Nagasaki. Adachi didn't think he'd be a good fit at the new branch, but he could have at least spoken to Kurosawa before making that decision. Kurosawa didn't want to be away from him either. Nevertheless, the opportunity was too big a chance to pass up. He felt Adachi wouldn't get another chance at success after this. The hurt on Kurosawa's face was evident. Why didn't Adachi trust him or talk to him? Seeing Kurosawa angry and sad was new. Adachi hadn't experienced this before, so he was clueless about what to say. Kurosawa then made it clear that he couldn't read thoughts. He couldn't know what Adachi was thinking without it being said. Struck by those words, Adachi was speechless as Kurosawa walked away. At Sugei's place, he was shocked to hear Minato found out he was a romance novelist. Minato had come across his book at the bookstore. He read it and found it really interesting. Seeing that Sugei was a real author, he thought it was amazing. Then, Minato asked him if there was a trick to sticking to something for so long. For Sugei, it was imagining the faces of his readers. Without an audience, he thought writing was meaningless nonsense. Changing the subject, he mentioned Minato had an important dance audition tomorrow. He was impressed to hear that he had made it to the semifinal. The audition had a major sponsor and would be streamed. Most of all, Shota was one of the judges. He was one of the people Minato danced with back in college. To Minato, he was a god, and was the reason he was trying to become a professional dancer. Sugei was certain he'd do well, and would also be rooting for him. Over at Adachi's, he was lying in bed, unable to sleep since last night. Kurosawa's heavy voice was still ringing in his ears. Events of that night kept replaying like a bad dream. Fortunately, Adachi wasn't going to work today. He'd head over to Sugei's place to explain his situation. Sugei let him know he was at fault because he asked someone other than his boyfriend for advice. There was no way for Kurosawa to figure out Adachi's thoughts without being told. He wasn't like them. Sugei had been worried about Adachi for a while. Put positively, Adachi was kind, but put negatively, because he had so little self-esteem, if he could hear the thoughts of someone he liked, he'd most likely end up acting to fulfill their desires. What would happen if those powers were gone? At some point, Adachi started relying on his ability too much. Even if he could read Kurosawa's mind, he'd never get anywhere without telling him how he truly felt. This time, it was his turn to tell Kurosawa how he was really feeling. Despite knowing that, he still struggled to find the words. Adachi would feel more relaxed typing out his feelings in a text. However, Sugei told him there was a better way. During Minato's semi-final auditions, he tried his best to show off to Shota. However, the results were unexpected. Shota failed everyone. He complimented Minato's skills, but said that was all he had. At that moment, it was as if Minato's world came crumbling down. Fortunately, 18 dancers had failed out of the semi-final, so there would be a consolation round, where the winner of the audience vote would get another shot at appearing in the final. After watching the stream, Sugei would text Minato, letting him know that he'd show up to support him next time. Seeing the other contestants, Minato noticed they were all younger than him. Then, Yuta, along with Hashiguchi, met up with him. They complimented his dancing, saying he was on another level. They'd also do their best to support him with votes, and tell everyone they could. Feeling depressed about it, Minato thought it was time to call it quits. But Yuta wouldn't let him. He suggested they go out for drinks. Minato would decline because he was working tonight. That night, while he was making deliveries, he got a call from Hashiguchi. A position had opened up at Hashiguchi's company, and they were looking for employees. Seeing how hardworking Minato was, he wanted him to at least meet the company president. The next day, meeting the president, Minato was informed that the company had an employee dorm and provided housing assistance. He thought it was a nice company, and the president seemed quite friendly. Shortly after, Sugei was about to head out for Minato's dancing when he got a call. He was told not to come anymore. Apparently, Minato's scooter ran out of gas. Given that he was still far away from the station, he doubted he'd make it in time. He didn't see any reason to bother. What Shota had told him during the last audition still stuck in his head. Besides, only one person would make it to the consolation round. And with his scooter out of gas, he figured this was God telling him to give up. Regardless, Sugei wouldn't let that be. He asked for Minato's location so he could come get him. Moments later, Sugei came to Minato's rescue on bike. He knew how much this audition meant to him, and how much Minato had practiced. Whatever God's plans were, he didn't care. The one thing he was certain of was that Minato could make his dreams come true, as long as he didn't give up. Arriving at the venue, Minato rushed in after thanking him. Meanwhile, Sugei was trying to recover. This was the first time he had driven in a while, and it freaked him out. Behind the curtains, Minato could tell this audition was really high level. There were tons of pro dancers all over the place. He'd recall how Sugei had encouraged him whenever he felt down. Because he was focusing so much on passing the audition, he forgot about those who were watching him. On the other side of the cameras, the viewers, Yuta, Hashiguchi, and his dance buddies were all watching him. Sugei was watching too. After the audition was done, Yuta would run to Minato, congratulating him on making it to the final round. This was the most excited he'd been in a while. Yuta was so happy for him. Outside, Sugei then met up with Minato, holding back his tears. He was glad Minato made it through. Seeing his emotions spill out, Minato couldn't help but ask why he was so nice to him. Sugei paused, then answered, "Because I have ulterior motives." But before he could explain, Minato was called back in to meet with the judges. Later, Sugei assumed Minato had lost because of something he'd seen online. The next day, at the office, Adachi was rehearsing how to properly apologize to Kurosawa. They'd miss each other just by the elevator. Apparently, Kurosawa had returned earlier than expected because his evening meeting was canceled. Thinking about Adachi, he recalled how he cornered him, showing all his worst traits. Asahina would come by, asking him to attend the department meeting. Luckily, Kurosawa could use that chance to distract himself until it was time to meet with Adachi after work. We turned back to Suge, who was worried because Minato hadn't replied to his messages. When the doorbell rang, it turned out to be a different delivery man this time. He asked about Minato, but the man wasn't allowed to discuss personal information. The man found Suge suspicious, wondering if he was stalking Minato. That was a natural response to a 30-something-year-old man becoming attached to a young deliveryman. It would make sense if Minato were avoiding him, considering what he said last time. Of course he'd be afraid of a man 7 years older than him, especially saying he had ulterior motives. With his mind running wild with so many questions, Suge figured it was best not to intrude on Minato's life anymore. His ability to read minds was meaningless if he couldn't even touch him, much less meet him. That night, while out on a walk, the news blared out about the miraculous rookie dance unit, which would debut on the first day of Shota's national tour. And to Suge's surprise, Minato was part of that group. He finally realized that they were always from different worlds. Their personalities, their ages, and their professions. They simply met briefly where their paths intersected. But that wouldn't stop Suge from being happy for him. The next day, Adachi left on his work trip to Nagasaki. On the plane, all he could think about was telling Kurosawa about his feelings. At home, Kurosawa sat quietly, staring at his phone with a heavy expression. There were no messages from Adachi. Ever since that night, he couldn't stop replaying Adachi's face in his mind. No matter how he tried to justify his actions or rephrase his thoughts, it didn't change the truth. Because Adachi could read minds, he must have felt everything. Kurosawa's selfishness, his jealousy, even the anger he tried to suppress. And in that moment, Adachi had looked frightened. Kurosawa was happy, truly happy, that Adachi had still chosen him, despite knowing all of that. But at the same time, guilt weighed on him. He realized he'd taken Adachi for granted. Even if they were dating, he had no right to control Adachi's choices. He thought about apologizing, but couldn't bring himself to do it. They hadn't seen each other lately because of work. Adachi had been transferred, and Kurosawa was busy outside the office. But was that really the reason? Or was he simply afraid that Adachi might leave him? Just then, the doorbell rang. Kurosawa opened the door to find a letter from Adachi. Instead of sending a text, Adachi had chosen to write to him, something more meaningful, more sincere. In the letter, Adachi apologized for not discussing his transfer beforehand. He admitted that he had relied too much on his powers, but explained he couldn't help it. Without being able to read Kurosawa's thoughts, he felt anxious, unsure of what Kurosawa was thinking. Adachi confessed that being apart from him made him uneasy. Even when Kurosawa had been so open and honest with his feelings, Adachi realized how much of a coward he could be. Still, there was one thing he wanted Kurosawa to believe above all else. He loved him so much that being away from him made his heart restless. As Kurosawa finished reading, his chest filled with warmth. This was the first time Adachi had ever told someone he loved them through a letter. His very first love letter at the age of 30. Back then, it had been Suge who suggested writing it by hand, believing it would carry more emotion than a simple text. Meanwhile, in Nagasaki, Adachi was adjusting to his new environment. Kusumoto apologized for making him work on a Sunday, but Adachi didn't mind at all. Kusumoto himself had also been working non-stop, overseeing the opening of a new branch. When they arrived at the building, Adachi was amazed by how large it was. The possibilities excited him, and ideas began flowing, one after another. Kusumoto couldn't help but admire his motivation. The old Adachi wouldn't have been like this. It was likely Kurosawa's influence. Even now, despite the distance between them, Adachi couldn't stop thinking about him. Elsewhere, Suge was struggling with his own emotions. Thinking about Minato, he decided to pour his unspoken feelings into a novel. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find the right words to describe him. After Minato's first day of performing with his group, he and his teammates were filled with excitement. Then, a package arrived for him, left at reception by someone. Inside was a pair of new shoes. When Minato heard it had been delivered by a tall man with glasses, he immediately ran outside. At that moment, Suge was walking alone, trying to convince himself to move on. But in the end, he couldn't stay away. Watching Minato dance, he felt a quiet happiness, knowing his dreams had come true. Suddenly, Minato called him, telling him to stay where he was. Moments later, he arrived, out of breath. Without hesitation, Minato asked if Suge had been the one who sent the shoes. Then, he apologized for ignoring Suge's messages. After failing the final audition round, he had been invited by Shota to join a new group. Everything happened so quickly, and because the project was secret, he couldn't explain it at the time. Suge congratulated him sincerely, but Minato admitted he didn't know how to respond to Suge's earlier confession. He wasn't sure if it was genuine or something else. And that uncertainty kept him from replying. Minato tried to brush it off, saying he must have misspoken. That was the sensible thing to do, he thought. At first, Suge had seen Minato as just a rude delivery guy, but over time, those feelings changed. He confessed that he'd been kind to Minato because he wanted him to like him. The dancer in his novel had even been modeled after him. Until now, Suge believed his love would never be returned, so he poured his feelings into stories instead. In fiction, romance could always exist without risk. But meeting Minato changed that. No story could compare to reality. Finally, Suge admitted the truth. He was in love with him. He assumed this would be their last meeting. But Minato stopped him, telling him not to decide everything on his own. He reminded Suge that he'd always been there for him when he needed encouragement. In fact, Minato had danced at his audition because he wanted Suge to see him. Their feelings were the same. Overcome with emotion, Suge embraced him. Minato blushed, saying, "I didn't give you permission for that, idiot." Aww. This is a cute moment. After writing countless romances, Suge realized that real love had no script, no guarantees. It made people foolish, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Back in Nagasaki, Adachi reflected on his own journey. Until turning 30, he had never dated anyone. He thought it would be a miracle to fall in love with someone who loved him back. Yet, here he was, in a relationship with Kurosawa, the first person who had ever loved him. Kurosawa, who appeared calm on the outside, but was full of chaotic emotions within. At first, it had been frightening, but Adachi realized something important. He had never disliked any of Kurosawa's thoughts. That was because every feeling Kurosawa had was sincere. Returning to his hotel, Adachi was shocked to find Kurosawa standing outside in the rain, waiting for him. Both of them were drenched as they hurried inside. They immediately began arguing over who should use the bath first, their usual awkward dynamic slipping back into place. In the end, Adachi grabbed a towel and began drying Kurosawa instead. Kurosawa apologized for showing up unannounced, but admitted that after reading the letter, he couldn't stay away. He needed to see Adachi. He needed to hear those words from him directly. If only he had powers like him, he thought. Then he could know exactly what Adachi was feeling. Adachi, unable to hold back anymore, began speaking honestly. Even if his words weren't perfect, he told Kurosawa everything. What he liked about him, how he felt. He loved Kurosawa's long eyelashes, his handsome face, and thought it was so cool that he worked hard while hiding it at work. He'd also never heard Kurosawa speak poorly of anyone, even though he appeared so calm. His thoughts were excited in contrast. Adachi thought Kurosawa was perfect, but surprisingly, his emotions showed on his face, and he had a narrow-minded jealous streak. Sometimes, when he was trying hard to act cool, he ended up looking lame instead. Adachi thought all of that was cute. Kurosawa was overwhelmed, his face flushing as he struggled to process it all. Through touch, Adachi could feel his joy and embarrassment spilling over. In that moment, words alone weren't enough. Closing the distance between them, Adachi leaned in and kissed him. And from there, their feelings deepened into something even more intimate. The next morning, Adachi woke up to the sight of Kurosawa's beautiful face right beside him. They had finally taken that step together. The memory of everything that happened the night before rushed back all at once, and his face flushed with embarrassment. The entire time, he'd been able to hear Kurosawa's thoughts, every emotion, every feeling. Until now, Adachi had always felt anxious whenever he couldn't hear Kurosawa's thoughts. But something had changed. This time, he felt certain they would be okay, even if they were apart. That realization brought him a quiet sense of comfort. When Kurosawa slowly woke up, he pulled Adachi closer and softly asked if they could stay in bed a little longer. But suddenly, Adachi jolted upright, as if something had clicked in his mind. Even though Kurosawa was touching him, even though he was clearly thinking something, Adachi couldn't hear a single thought. His ability was gone. Panic and frustration filled him as he tried to understand what had happened. Was it because they had slept together? Or had he been wrong about being a wizard all along? Seeing his distress, Kurosawa calmly made him a cup of coffee. Helping him settle down, he admitted that he'd always been grateful for Adachi's powers. Even after hearing all his messy, selfish thoughts, Adachi had still chosen to love him. But in truth, it wasn't that power that had touched his heart. It was Adachi's words. Kurosawa hesitated before asking if Adachi regretted what happened between them. Adachi burst out immediately. He didn't regret it one bit, not even a little. In fact, he'd fallen so deeply in love that he couldn't even put it into words. If he ever felt anxious again, he promised he would rely on his own voice, not his powers. That was when it finally clicked. Adachi realized that he no longer needed his ability. He felt secure enough with Kurosawa, even without hearing his thoughts. That was why the power had disappeared. Hearing this, Kurosawa's eyes filled with tears. He couldn't hold them back. To him, Adachi was far more charming than he could ever be. All his life, Kurosawa had tried to be perfect, But ever since he fell for Adachi, everything changed. Small moments made his heart race, and he often found himself acting desperate or clumsy. He had embarrassed himself more times than he could count. Yet, strangely, he didn't hate that version of himself. Being with Adachi made him feel alive, overwhelmed with happiness. He couldn't stop the tears from falling. With a soft smile, Kurosawa asked Adachi to guess what he was thinking. Adachi didn't hesitate. He simply opened his arms. Kurosawa stepped forward, and they embraced warmly. Even without hearing his thoughts, Adachi noticed something new. The silence didn't feel empty. Instead, Kurosawa's warmth and presence felt stronger than ever. Suddenly, the alarm rang. It was time for Kurosawa to head out to his flight. Though he didn't want to leave, he had no choice. Before going, they agreed to talk properly about Adachi's transfer once he returned. Kurosawa leaned in and kissed him gently before walking away. Days passed slowly as Adachi continued working in Nagasaki. Eventually, Kurosawa came to visit him again. After sharing a meal together, they stood side by side washing dishes. It was then that Adachi admitted he was seriously considering accepting the transfer. At first, it had only been about the pay, but after seeing the empty store, he felt something new, a desire to build something from nothing. Being in Nagasaki made him realize that the reason he'd become more proactive was because of Kurosawa. Just thinking about him gave him confidence. Still, he admitted he would miss him terribly. Back at the office, Adachi informed his manager that he would accept the transfer. Even though the thought of being away from Kurosawa made him anxious, he was determined to give it his all. Later, Suge came by to help him pack. He was still surprised by Adachi's decision, but Adachi thanked him sincerely for his encouragement. As Suge reached out to remove a piece of tape from Adachi's back, accidentally read his thoughts, and learned Adachi had lost his powers. Even so, he felt genuinely happy for him. Seeing how much Adachi had grown, Suge decided to strengthen his own resolve as well. Still, the thought of losing his own power one day made him uneasy. After a month in Nagasaki, Adachi found himself overwhelmed. Work piled up endlessly, and despite Kusamoto's help, it was becoming difficult to keep up. Word of his struggles eventually reached the director through Asahina, but they still believed in him. Kurosawa, however, was shocked to hear that Adachi was having such a hard time. When Yuta met him, he told Kurosawa not to force himself to come to the office. He looked sick, likely due to a cold. Those only guessed the real reason. He was simply missing Adachi, and quietly cheered for Kuroada to stay strong. Oh my god, she even gave them a ship name. Back in Nagasaki, Adachi collapsed onto the floor after returning from work. He was exhausted. There was still so much to do, yet he felt useless. People treated him like a leader because he came from the main branch, but all he could really do was handle systems. Kusamoto seemed far more suited for leadership, and that only made things harder. Looking out the window, Adachi noticed the rain. It reminded him of the day Kurosawa had stood waiting for him in the rain. He missed him deeply. Even when they lived in Tokyo, there had been times they couldn't meet, but this felt different. At the same time, Kurosawa was thinking about him too. Their messages didn't show any signs of struggle, but maybe Adachi was just hiding it so he wouldn't worry. Meanwhile, Adachi worried about Kurosawa's cold. Then, a message came through. Kurosawa told him he had gone to work that day. It gave Adachi a small sense of relief, but both of them remained restless, unsure of how to ease each other's worries. The next day, Adachi boarded a plane back to Tokyo. As soon as he landed, he ran through the streets, determined to see Kurosawa. At the same time, Kurosawa was rushing towards him as well. They found each other midway, both breathless. As they walked together, Adachi admitted everything. Being away, drowning in work, and missing Kurosawa had made him feel anxious and negative. He couldn't stand the distance anymore, so he made a decision. When he returned to Tokyo for good, he wanted them to live together. It would be their first step towards building a future side by side. Hearing this, Kurosawa dropped to his knees in shock. Overwhelmed, he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Adachi gently pulled him into an embrace and kissed his forehead. Kurosawa responded by taking out a pair of matching rings. It was his way of showing his commitment, their promise to each other. They slipped the rings onto each other's fingers, sealing their bond. Meanwhile, at Suge's place, he and Minato were happily spending time together, their own story moving forward. The days went by, and back at the office, Adachi and Kurosawa's matching rings quietly sparkled. No one seemed to notice, except for Nozomi, of course. She thought Kuroada was so precious, she couldn't breathe. And as time passed, the two of them began living together until at some point, taking the next step and eventually getting married. Wow, we got the satisfying marriage ending. Yeah, I thought this series was pretty good, especially the themes about self-worth and insecurity. You know, a good portion of this show was about Adachi thinking his entire life he was nothing special, but through his relationship with Kurosawa, he slowly realizes that he has value just as he is. You don't have to change who you are to deserve love. You would think Adachi's mind reading would give him a shortcut to understanding people, but it also created problems for him as well. He relied on it a lot instead of having honest conversations with Kurosawa right before the end. Losing his powers shows that real relationships depend on communication through honest words and not assumptions. I think there are a few more themes I can think of, like Suge being an author and discovering real love, like fantasy versus reality. But what do you guys think? Subscribe for more content, but for now, watch this next video. It's me, Comfy T. I'll see you all in the next one.